I was in the middle of folding new arrivals at my boutique when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. I'm leaving you. Moving to Miami with Sophia. Don't try to contact me. I already emptied our joint account. Take care. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, just to be sure I wasn't seeing things. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. I just stared. A customer walked in, her eyes lighting up at the handbags on display. Do you have this in navy blue? She asked. I smiled, my voice steady. Of course. Let me grab it for you. I helped her pick out a matching scarf, wrapped her purchase in crisp tissue paper, and handed her the bag with a warm "Have a lovely day." Not once did I let it show that my 12-year marriage had just ended through a text message. As soon as she left, I locked the boutique door and sat down behind the counter. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating a response. Then I typed a "good luck." That was all. No anger. No pleading. Just 2 words. I pressed send, exhaled, and placed my phone face down. Ethan thought he had broken me. He had no idea. Truth is, I had seen this coming for months. The late nights at work. The sudden interest in the gym, the new clothes, the cologne he never used to wear. The phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now always face down, locked with a new passcode. 3 months ago, I found a restaurant receipt in his car, dinner for 2. The same night, he told me he was working late. I didn't confront him. Instead, I drove straight to the bank and opened a separate account. A week later, he suggested combining our finances to simplify things. I smiled and agreed. What he didn't know was that I had already transferred my savings elsewhere. The joint account? I left just enough in there to keep him from getting suspicious. 2 months ago, I noticed hotel charges on our credit card. I took screenshots. Then I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. A month ago, I overheard him on the phone, laughing, his voice low. "She's so predictable," he said. "No, she has no idea." But I did. And I was ready. Now, sitting in my boutique, his final message in front of me, I felt relieved. The waiting was over. I picked up my phone and made the call. "It's time," I told my lawyer. She exhaled like she'd been expecting this. "The papers are ready. I'll file them first thing in the morning." Inside, the city moved on like nothing had changed. Cars honked, people laughed, the sun cast a golden glow over the street. Inside, I closed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and locked up for the day. Tomorrow, Ethan would think he had won. But the real game was just beginning. The day I found that first restaurant receipt, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to be the woman who fell apart while her husband ran off with someone half her age. No. I was going to be the woman who saw the storm coming and built a shelter before the first drop of rain fell. First step was money. Ethan had always liked to act like our finances were shared, but the truth was I had built my boutique from scratch. I put in the long hours, dealt with the suppliers, and handled the accounts. The boutique thrived because of me, and I made sure to keep its finances separate from our joint account, something Ethan never paid much attention to. But my personal savings? That was another story. I knew he'd try to take it. So I moved my money into a new account under my name only. Then I started gathering proof. The credit card statements, the hotel charges, the late-night dinners, all of it. Every suspicious transaction, every financial move Ethan made, I documented it. I even took screenshots of his text messages whenever he got a little too comfortable, bragging to his friends about how I would never see it coming. A week later, I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. She was sharp, professional, and didn't waste time on sympathy. "You're smart to come now," she said, flipping through my stack of evidence. "Most women don't prepare until after the damage is done. This puts you in control. Control. That was the key word. I wasn't just preparing for the fallout. I was making sure that when Ethan made his move, I would already be 10 steps ahead. The night after his text, Ethan must have been expecting some kind of meltdown. Tears, begging, maybe even an angry phone call. Instead, he got silence. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. "Don't bother begging. Sophia and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later." I sipped my coffee and ignored it. An hour later, "I know this is hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." I actually laughed at that one. My little shop. The business that made more than his middle management salary. The one I had built while he rolled his eyes at my long hours and called it my hobby. Then the final text. "By the way, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift." Oh, perfect. I called the credit card company. "I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately." "Of course, ma'am. Can you identify the charges?" 2 first-class tickets to Miami and a hotel booking at the Royal Palm. The woman on the other end hesitated. "You said fraudulent?" "Yes. My husband emptied our joint account and ran off with another woman. But before he left, he admitted, via text, that he used our shared card for their trip." There was a pause. Then a small professional cough. "Would you like to forward us those messages for documentation?" "Absolutely." By the time Ethan and Sophia arrived at the airport the next morning, their tickets had been invalidated. When they got to the hotel, their reservation had been canceled. And me? I was sipping champagne at home, waiting for the real fun to begin. It didn't take long for the phone calls to start. By noon the next day, Ethan's mother was on the line, her voice tight with forced concern. "Olivia, dear, Ethan told us everything. He said you've been difficult, that you pushed him away. And now you're being spiteful. He told us you're causing problems with his travel plans." I put her on speaker while I adjusted a display of handbags. "Did he also tell you he emptied our joint account and used our shared credit card to book a trip with his girlfriend?" Silence. Then, hesitant, "Well, he said you left him no choice. That you were cold, distant." I sighed. "Barbara, I have his text messages. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money? Or maybe the one where he mocked my age?" Another long pause. "He did seem a bit cruel," she admitted. "I told him that message was unnecessary." "Unnecessary," I repeated, shaking my head. "Barbara, this conversation is over. My lawyer advised minimal contact with Ethan's family during the proceedings." She let out a tiny gasp. "Proceedings? Goodbye, Barbara." By that evening, Ethan's sister Amanda had already started spreading gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Ethan and Sophia were stuck at a budget motel near the airport. Their dream escape to Miami had turned into a nightmare of declined cards and unexpected setbacks. "He tried using his personal credit cards, but they've been maxed out for months," one friend informed me. I wasn't surprised. That was another red flag I'd noticed. Ethan had been drowning in debt for a while. He just didn't think it would ever catch up to him. My lawyer called with an update. "The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday," she said. "Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets." "Has he been served yet?" I asked. "Not yet, but he will be," she assured me. "At his new motel address." I smiled. Perfect. Monday morning, I walked into the courthouse wearing my favorite tailored suit, my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor. Ethan was already there, fidgeting in his chair. He wore designer jeans that were too tight for his age and a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Sophia wasn't with him. My lawyer laid everything out methodically. Screenshots of Ethan's texts admitting to draining our account. credit card statements proving he used shared funds for his little getaway, documented proof of his hidden expenses and financial misconduct. The judge adjusted his glasses and turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, you admitted, via text, to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this?" Ethan shifted in his seat. "I was just trying to make a clean break." The judge raised an eyebrow. "By committing financial fraud?" Ethan's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client admits to some rash decisions, but Olivia's actions have been vindictive and calculating." My lawyer didn't even blink. "You mean prudent?" she countered. "My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive. That's smart business." The judge flipped through my documentation. The house deed in my name only. The boutique's incorporation papers proving sole ownership. The financial records showing that I had always kept my business earnings separate. He looked back at Ethan. "And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets?" Ethan swallowed hard. "But the business grew during our marriage." "It was established before the marriage," my lawyer interrupted. "And Mrs. Carter maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned." Ethan's face turned red as the reality sank in. He thought he could just walk away with half of everything. He thought I would be too blindsided to fight back. The judge didn't take long to decide. "The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Carter is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. Ethan shot up in his seat. "But that money's gone. We spend it on." "Then I suggest you find a way to replace it," the judge said flatly. Outside the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Ethan pacing near the entrance, running a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumped. Sophia was nowhere in sight. I didn't stop to acknowledge him. I had a business to run, a life to live, and I was just getting started. Cracks in Ethan's grand escape started forming almost immediately. A few days after the court hearing, Sophia was gone. Word got around that she had packed her bags and left their dingy motel, realizing that being with Ethan wasn't as glamorous as she had imagined. Without my money, without the luxury vacations and fancy restaurants, he was just a broke, middle-aged man with a dwindling future. A mutual friend later told me that Sophia had vented to a coworker saying, "He said we'd start fresh in Miami, but he has nothing. I'm not supporting a grown man who can't even pay for dinner." Reality had hit her faster than expected. With Sophia gone, Ethan scrambled to keep his life from falling apart. His personal credit cards had been maxed out long before he left, which meant he had no emergency cushion. His attempt to rent an apartment failed. His credit score had taken too many hits. But his biggest shock came at work. Company had been watching him for a while, especially after his relationship with Sophia, who had been their receptionist, came to light. Shar opened an investigation, and instead of getting the promotion he had been expecting, he was hit with a formal reprimand. A few months later, the company restructured, and his position was eliminated. No job, no girlfriend, no savings, and for the first time in years, no control. He tried calling me once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. "Olivia, can we talk?" I deleted it. While Ethan's life crumbled, mine flourished. The boutique had always been successful, but now it thrived. Women came in, whispering about my story, about how I had outmaneuvered my cheating husband. Some came just to show support, walking out with more than they had planned to buy. "Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them," one woman said, handing me her credit card with a knowing smile. I hired more employees, launched an online store, and started planning a second location. Meanwhile, Ethan was struggling to keep up with rent in a tiny studio apartment above a garage. Mutual acquaintances mentioned that he had tried dating apps, but women his age weren't interested in a man who had moved back in with his parents after a failed midlife crisis. Younger women? They had heard the stories. Sophia had warned her friends, even sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back after she left. His name became a cautionary tale in their social circles. Ethan's family, once so quick to take his side, started reaching out to me again. His sister Amanda stopped by the boutique one day, her fingers trailing over a silk scarf as she avoided my gaze. "I know we didn't support you at first," she admitted. "He played the victim so well. But watching how he handled everything, we see the truth now." I nodded but said nothing. I had moved past needing their approval. As for Ethan, he had stopped trying to control the narrative. With every failed attempt to claw his way back, he was learning the truth he had never considered. The life he had thrown away wasn't something he could just replace. And I was just getting started. As the months passed, Ethan's life went from bad to worse. After losing his job, he tried to secure another position in the same industry, but his reputation had followed him. No company wanted to take a risk on someone with a history of workplace scandals and financial recklessness. He eventually settled for a lower-paying job, far from the leadership role he once bragged about. The glamorous new life he had envisioned in Miami had crumbled before it even began. Now he was barely scraping by, living in a cramped studio apartment. His once carefully curated image, designer clothes, expensive cologne, confidence was gone. Dating was another disaster. Women his age weren't interested in a man drowning in debt, still licking his wounds from a failed affair. Younger women, the kind he had chased, had heard the stories. Sophia had warned them, even sharing his desperate texts with her friends. "He said I was the only one who understood him," one of her posts read. Then I found out he told his ex-wife the same thing before leaving her. Some men never change. Ethan's last safety net, his family, had also unraveled. His sister Amanda, once his biggest supporter, refused to lend him money. His parents, tired of the excuses, stopped covering his rent. "We raised you better than this," his mother had told him. For the first time in his life, Ethan was truly alone. While Ethan struggled, my boutique flourished. The story of my divorce had become local gossip, but instead of pity, I was met with admiration. Customers came in not just for the clothes, but for the story behind them. Women wanted to support me, to celebrate the fact that I hadn't just survived, I had thrived. Within a year, I expanded to a second location. I hired more staff, launched an online store, and even received offers from national brands wanting to collaborate. My little shop, as Ethan had once mocked, had turned into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected visitor walked into my store. Sophia. She looked different, more mature, less like the wide-eyed girl who had fallen for Ethan's charm. She hesitated before speaking, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I believed everything he told me, that you were controlling, cold, unsupportive. But then he did the same thing to me." I continued organizing a display of handbags. "What did you expect?" She sighed. "I guess I thought I was special." I finally looked up. "We all do. Until we realize we were just part of the pattern." She nodded. "I left him months ago. I went back to school, got my degree. I even started my own consulting business. You were right, there's a difference between dreams and escapes." I smiled slightly. "And which one are you building now?" She straightened her shoulders. "A real one." After she left, my assistant walked over, wide-eyed. "Was that the woman?" I nodded. "And what did she want?" "Closure," I said simply. "And maybe a little redemption." Ethan had spent the last year trying to rebuild the life he threw away. Meanwhile, I had built something even greater. And that was the best revenge of all. Ethan's story became one of self-destruction. I watched from afar as his spiral continued. The once confident, high-flying man who thought he had it all figured out was now drowning in a mess of his own making. He had squandered his chance at rebuilding his life, and every step he took seemed to pull him deeper into the hole. His debts were mounting, his relationships were falling apart, and the worst part? He still blamed everyone else. Every time I saw his name in the tabloids for another failed venture or bitter public outburst, I couldn't help but feel a little piece of relief. I wasn't the one stuck in the past. My story, the one he had tried so hard to ruin, was now one of growth and strength. And I wanted others, especially young women and aspiring entrepreneurs, to know that. You can't build a business or a life if you're constantly running away from your past. Use it. Learn from it. But don't let it define you. When I started my boutique, I didn't have a blueprint, I didn't have money, and I certainly didn't have Ethan's so-called connections. What I had was a passion, a vision, and a refusal to let my mistakes define me. I never once blamed my circumstances, even when things felt impossible. I took ownership. When it feels like the world is crumbling, when people betray you or walk away, remember, the only person who can decide your future is you. It's your choices, your hustle, and your resilience that will carry you to places you never thought possible. Fast forward 5 years, and everything I had worked for had turned into something I could be proud of. I became a public figure in women's business leadership, invited to speak at conferences, interviewed for podcasts, and even featured in national publications. What started as a small boutique had blossomed into a thriving empire. I had become the very thing I once wished to see, an example that success wasn't just about money or status, but about building something meaningful, something that stood the test of time. Ethan, on the other hand, was a shadow of his former self. He had faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale that no one wanted to hear. His once grandiose dreams had turned to dust, leaving him stuck in a cycle of self-pity and regret. As I looked at my life, my business, my community, the woman I had become, I realized how much of it had been shaped by those lessons in the past. Ethan had been a part of that lesson, but he no longer had a place in my future. And just like that, my betrayal became the foundation for my business success. I had turned pain into purpose. And that, in the end, was my true victory. It was framed and hung on the wall in my office, a simple photo of the text message that had changed everything. The infamous text, the one that started it all, the one that revealed Ethan's betrayal. At the time, I couldn't imagine how something so painful could become a catalyst for change. But now, 5 years later, I looked at it with a different perspective. It wasn't just a reminder of the pain I had endured, but a reminder of how far I had come. That text, full of lies and hurt, had been the spark that ignited my fire, pushed me to be stronger, smarter, and more determined than I had ever been. Now, when I looked at it, I saw the woman I had become. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was a woman who had taken control of her life, her business, and her future. I had turned the worst moment of my life into the greatest opportunity, and that message was now my constant motivation. My journey didn't stop with my success, it evolved into something bigger, something meaningful. I knew that there were other women out there who felt powerless, who felt stuck in relationships or financial situations they couldn't escape. I wanted to be their voice, their support, and their example. I wanted to help women protect themselves financially, not just from betrayal like mine, but from any situation where they felt trapped. I began offering workshops, speaking at events, and creating content on financial independence and self-empowerment. I shared my story not for pity but to inspire. To show that no matter what had happened in your past, your future was still yours to shape. 5 years later, my life looked nothing like it had back then. Ethan, on the other hand, was a man full of regret, stuck in a life he had built on lies. The very people who had once supported him now distanced themselves, and his attempts at redemption were met with indifference. He had burned too many bridges. I didn't wish him harm, I had long since let go of any bitterness, but seeing him in that state reminded me of how far I had come. I had taken the pain, the betrayal, and turned it into a life of empowerment. As I looked at my life, my business, and the women I had helped along the way, I realized that my legacy wasn't just about financial success. It was about strength. The strength to rebuild, to rise, and to never let anyone or anything define your worth. And that was something Ethan could never take from me. Thank you for watching to this end. If you love this stories, kindly like and subscribe to my channel for more stories.